Jess sat in the dim glow of her paramedic rig, glancing at her watch. It was her last shift in town before moving to a new city for a fresh start. She had made the decision weeks ago, accepting a job at a bigger hospital in a city with more opportunities and less heartbreak. Her bags were packed, and all that was left was to make it through tonight. The radio crackled with reports of Hurricane Cleo making landfall earlier than expected. As the wind howled and the rain pounded on the roof, Jess felt a knot form in her stomach. The storm was worse than anticipated, and the flooding was reaching dangerous levels. Just as she was contemplating heading back to base, the dispatcher's voice came through. All units, we need assistance with evacuations in the east side neighborhood. Floodwaters are rising fast, and residents are trapped. Jess hesitated. She promised herself she wouldn't take any risky calls tonight, wanting to avoid any last-minute complications. But her sense of duty tugged at her, and with a sigh she grabbed the radio. Unit 23 responding to east side. She arrived in the neighborhood to find the streets flooded and people frantically waddling through the knee-high water. Jess and her team sprang into action, guiding families to safety, carrying children, and reassuring the elderly. Each time she thought she could leave, another call for help came through. "I'm done after this one," she told herself, but as another cry for assistance echoed, she found herself heading toward it once more. The last call stretched into the night, her desire to help overriding her plans to leave. As the hurricane raged on, Jess realized that maybe this night was meant to test her resolve. Little did she know she would face more than just a storm before dawn. As the hours passed, the situation grew dire. The floodwaters reached chest level, and the breeze floated through the streets. Power lines sparked, trees groaned under the force of the winds, and the radio was full of frantic calls. Jess's exhaustion was mounting, but the thought of leaving anyone behind kept her going. Her team, soaked and shivering, followed her through the darkened neighborhood, lighting their way with flashlights. They helped families trapped in houses where the doors wouldn't budge against the weight of water. They carried supplies to those who had no choice but to shelter in place. While clearing out an old apartment building, Jess spotted a woman on the third floor, sitting in a wheelchair. She waved frantically, calling out, "Please help me." Jess waded through the water and climbed the stairs to reach her. The woman looked at her with an expression Jess couldn't quite place. "You look so much like your mother," she whispered, her eyes softening. "I knew her." Jess was stunned. Her mother had passed away years ago, and she rarely met anyone who remembered her. Seeing her shocked, the woman continued, "We were neighbors for years. She used to bring me flowers from her garden." A surge of emotion washed over Jess. Her mother's kindness had inspired her to go into healthcare, to be the person who made others feel safe. This woman, a stranger, reminded her of why she had chosen this path. She helped the woman to safety, her mind racing with memories of her mother and her commitment to helping those in need. This moment made her question everything about her move, as the very community she was leaving needed her the most. Jess barely had time to process the encounter before another call came through. A family was trapped in their attic, the flood waters nearly reaching them. As she headed toward the address, she realized she hadn't told her team about her encounter with the woman who'd known her mother. Somehow the connection felt too personal to share just yet. Arriving at the house, she and her partner climbed through the waterlogged first floor, eventually reaching the attic ladder. Inside, they found a family huddled together, a father, mother, and two young children clinging to each other. Jess felt a pang of sympathy, knowing how terrified they must be. "Come on," she said gently, helping them down the ladder. She carried the smallest child, reassuring him with a smile, even though she could feel the exhaustion in her bones. One by one, they helped the family out to safety, guiding them through the floodwaters to higher ground. As the night wore on, Jess's body screamed for rest, but every time she thought of quitting, she remembered the woman's words. She thought of her mother's kindness, of the small ways she had made life better for those around her. Her mother had never sought recognition, but Jess knew her impact on others had been profound. With every rescue, Jess felt her sense of purpose grow stronger. She began to wonder if moving to a new city was really the right choice. Here, she had history, roots, and people who needed her. Despite the chaos around her, she felt a clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. She promised herself she would keep going as long as there were people in need, realizing the pull to stay was becoming harder to ignore. The storm showed no signs of relenting, and Jess's exhaustion deepened. Her hands were scraped, her knees bruised, and her heart heavy with the weight of so many lives saved, and some she couldn't reach in time. Yet each time she felt the urge to stop, a voice within her urged her forward. During a brief moment of rest, she leaned against the ambulance, staring up at the angry, swirling sky. The streets were empty of life, but she knew behind every closed door and flooded street were people relying on her and her team. As if on cue, her radio crackled. Possible survivors spotted in the old community center, the dispatcher announced. Jess and her partner arrived to find the man trapped beneath debris from a fallen beam. His leg was pinned and his face was pale from pain and blood loss. Jess worked quickly, stabilizing him as best she could with her limited supplies. "I didn't think anyone would come," he murmured, tears in his eyes. Jess squeezed his hand, her voice soft. "We're here. You're going to be okay." As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Jess realized the depth of what she was doing. She wasn't just a paramedic on her last shift. She was a lifeline for people who had lost all hope. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Helping the man made her decision clear. Leaving this town wasn't the answer. She couldn't feel it now, an undeniable connection to this community. They needed her, and in some way, she needed them too. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to dissipate. The waters receded, revealing the damage left in its wake. Jess looked around at the wreckage, the homes, the streets, the places she had grown up with, all battered by the storm. But amidst the destruction, she saw resilience, people helping each other, neighbors offering aid, strangers coming together. Jess watched as her team worked tirelessly, a sense of pride swelling within her. She realized that her roots were deeply tied to this place, to these people. The town had shaped her, and she wasn't ready to turn her back on it. Her decision was made. She would stay, rebuild, and serve the community that had given her so much. Moving might have brought new opportunities, but here she had a purpose that went beyond any career ambition. As she helped one last family to safety, she felt the weight of her decision lift, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. She knew there would be more storms, more challenges, but she was ready to face them. Jess looked out over the town, her heart full with the knowledge that this was where she belonged. And as the sun rose over her hometown, Jess prepared to meet the days ahead with renewed strength, committed to the life she was choosing to rebuild.